All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to be leading session 3, which is about project initiation and planning. So hopefully in the last couple of sessions, you've learned how to market the job, connect with the client, prepare the proposal, and hopefully get a signed proposal. So Heather, we can go to the next slide. So today we're going to go through contracts, how to kick off the project with scope, schedule, fee, and then Jackie will take a 10-minute break, and then Jackie will come in and walk us through different fee types, the parts of the project initiation form or the PIF, and then a little bit of invoices and batch billing. So lots of good stuff today. So what do we consider to be in the project initiation and planning phase of a project? As I just mentioned, always getting a contract. I remember a time we had a project where the team went ahead and started work, delivered schematic design documents before we received a signed contract, spent over $300,000 in charges, which is not good. We did eventually get a signed contract, but we had to hold that money and cross our fingers. We prefer not to do that. Also, subconsultant, subcontractor agreements, which I'll touch more on. And then, you may or may not have been involved in the proposal, or the proposal may have just been, a percentage of fee on a construction cost estimate, or there wasn't a great breakdown. So working through developing that scope, schedule, and a fee breakdown. And then obviously when we start to kick off the project, making sure we've got the team members available, some of our schedule milestones, and then obviously it's time to submit the PIF and hold a kickoff meeting. So we can go to the next slide. So we'll start off with a contract. So we can go to the next slide. I wanted to pose a question, if you could, put it in the chat. Can you name something in a contract that a project manager should look for? And it could be anything that's in the contract. So feel free to put that in the chat. Everybody's thinking, huh? I know there's more. Excellent. Indemnification clause, liability clause, terms, payment terms. All good things. Exclusions, yes. Assumptions, exclusions. All right, well, the rest can keep going. I'm gonna move forward. So when we talk about contracts, there are all different kinds of contracts. So I know Chris went over probably the LaBella professional services agreement, which you may include with the proposal. There's also the client agreement. A lot of our clients, OGS, DASNY, et cetera, have their own agreements that they want us to sign. There's a standard AIA or architectural agreement. You may have clients where you have a master services term agreement, and it could be a purchase order, just the signed proposal. We could be a subconsultant to someone else. So there's all different kinds of agreements or POs that really are the contract. So if you have, this is a question that had come up in some previous sessions. When you have an existing perm agreement, master services agreement, blanket agreement, different clients call them different things. There is no need to do the LaBella professional services agreement. Typically in those types of agreements, the client will issue us a task order or a purchase order, and that becomes our scope for that particular assignment. Terms and conditions. So all of these different types of contracts will have different terms and conditions. Some of the things I want to point out, we have the typical that you've all mentioned with indemnity, liability, insurance, but lately we've seen a lot of other requirements on cybersecurity. If you're working with critical infrastructure data, for instance, some of our utility clients or industrial clients consider their data secure. They don't want to, risk having someone find out their patents. So we need to pay attention to what are we signing up for in this agreement. Also, I called it sustainability, but it's, if you've heard of ESG, so there are social governance, environmental conditions that we're being asked to adhere to. Obviously, minority, women-owned, service-disabled, veteran-owned business, and then different employment practices. So, if it's EEO practices or anything like that. We do carry cyber liability insurance, and we do have some other insurances that I know the legal team is making sure to include in our standard professional services agreements that haven't been there typically. But definitely take some time, read through at least our standard agreements so that you see what those different terms and conditions are that we're asking our clients, if we're using that, to sign up for our. So when you talk about indemnification and liability, indemnity, there's lots of different language that different contracts try to put in there to, hold us accountable to different things. And if you've attended any of the legal lunch and learns, Bob Tardo goes over this in much more detail. I would also suggest going to the legal intranet page where they have lots of other good information about explaining some of these contractual things. So we only want to be indemnify to the extent caused by our negligent acts or omissions. There are lots of other things that we try to be held to that we should not be, making sure we are not held to. And liability. So there is a contracts review checklist or cheat sheet on the internet, and there is an indemnity page cheat sheet that goes into and explains much more of this, and also a liability cheat sheet. So again, liability, we're trying to limit our liability based on a value of the fee. So if LaBella's fee is less than $50,000, we want to have a certain limit of liability. And if it's over, then typically it's to the available proceeds of our insurance coverage, not to the maximum of our insurance coverage or some other language like that. We can go to the next slide. So we've run into cases where we don't agree with some of the wording in the contracts. And if we're being asked to sign a client issued agreement, and we think, gee, I really want to change this, that's when I would suggest maybe you have, and it's Francine McAndrew in our legal department, run that by her, see if, you think, is this something a client might accept if I change this, or maybe it's not. And also clients try to change our professional services agreement. to their benefit usually, which not unique. So Francine is our go-to for those things. Our legal department, we can't just say, hey, I have an agreement. Can you look at this for me? Tell me whether it's good or not, because we have over 4,000 projects each year. So that would be way too many for them to review the entire contract. And sometimes the agreements contracts are, 60 pages or more. So that's a lot of reading. So just look for some of those key points, like I mentioned, the indemnity, the liability, insurances, etc. Again, I'm maybe reiterating some of what Chris covered, but if you're using the LaBella professional services agreement, you would not issue that as signed by us when you submit that with your proposal, your letter proposal. We typically want the client to sign that first, not typically. We need the client to sign that first, and then we would send it back as an executed copy. Now, if we're being asked to sign a client issued agreement, then it works the opposite, where LaBella would be expected to review and sign that before the client. And either one, those are both okay. Just remember kind of the order of each of those. And then the agreement, whether it's our agreement or a client issued agreement, all need to be signed by an officer of the company. And I've tried to list, who those are. There are some people that also have signatory authority up to a certain, fee amount. And that list is on the contracts information legal page of the intranet, and does change periodically. So I would recommend to view that periodically. So subconsultants and subcontractors. Can anybody tell me what you think the difference between a subcontractor and a subconsultant might be? Anyone want to shout it out or just put it in the chat?
Subcontractor is someone that's hired by a contractor who can be hired by a developer, for example.
Victor, can you say that again? I wasn't able to hear you very well.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't have my microphone was up. I said a subcontractor is a contractor that's hired by a contractor that could be hired by a developer. So I don't know if that's clear to you or not, but a subcontractor is hired by a contractor who's hired by the owner, by the developer, if you allow me to say.
That is true. In this case, sometimes we have subcontractors. What I like to think of it is a subcontractor is providing labor and materials to our project, where a subconsultant is providing services. So say you're doing an inspection on a building or a wastewater treatment plant, and you need somebody to provide a man lift and somebody that's operating that man lift. You would need an agreement with that subcontractor to provide those services to you. If you had a subconsultant, say, you had someone doing geotechnical analysis, that would be a subconsultant because they're providing a professional service. So it gets muddy sometimes. Like some examples are had remote underwater sonar or GPR services or demolition for exploration. But in all those cases, we want to make sure that we have agreements with all of those firms or people. Sometimes they're individuals that have a PLLC, et cetera. And then again, we will issue them typically our standard subconsultant or subcontractor agreements and have them signed first, and then our officer or signatory authority sign. Now, sometimes we have master services agreements with some of those. Like I know we have some with like Atlantic Testing Laboratories. So in that case, we just do kind of the task assignment route. So all the terms and conditions have already been figured out and accepted. We don't need to have the full agreement signed again. So there, you can see there's lots of nuances with contracts. But if I can encourage you to, for anything, just make sure to have one, make sure it's signed by both parties. And then Heather, if you go to the next slide. Here is just a screenshot of what that contracts information page on the legal page has. So you can see there are some resources like the list of officers and signatory authority, the cheat sheets, our standard agreements, just blank template agreements. And then these are some of our certificates of insurance. So when a client asks, you know, I need a copy of your general liability insurance or your professional liability insurance. We have some of those that are available to just grab off the internet and submit with the to the client. Sometimes they ask to be listed as an additional insured. And in that case, then you would want to send that request to our insurance@labellapc.com email address. And we have a group that then will work with our insurance company to get that added and then get you that certificate to then send to the client. We'll go to the next slide. So all agreements, whether it's our PSA or the client agreement, PO, a task order, etc., we want all executed copies to be saved in the project folder. Where they're supposed to be is in the project management folder, agreements and amendments subfolder. I have noticed that they're in different places in our project folders, which, you know, is okay. At least they're there. I'd rather have them there than not there. But if you can help us by making sure that they're in that agreements and amendments folder, then if someone in accounting or, you know, in the legal department needs to find it, if there's, you know, a cybersecurity rider that needs to be signed, then we all know that where to go find these things. And then to help, if you can submit a copy of the agreement and any other, you know, the proposal, any other documentation, maybe you got a retainer on a project, submit copies of all that with the PIF. And Jackie will go over that in more detail. So contract amendments and supplements. They happen frequently. We do have, I think Catherine Mannion had brought one from former Chazen that was used as a template for a supplement. They take many different forms. Again, sometimes it's initiated by the client, sometimes it's ours. We don't have a standard template other than the one that Catherine had. So the key there is we just want to make sure that it references the original agreement terms and conditions, and that, again, we get it signed by both parties and then saved in our project folder. Now, Jackie may correct me if this is not correct, but I've been told by accounting that we don't need to resubmit the PIF when there's an amendment or a supplement. However, we do need to make sure to coordinate with the biller so that we can get the Deltec budget updated. Is that correct, Jackie?
That's correct. Yeah. It kind of depends on who the biller is and their preference. And it also depends on like the nature of the amendment and the supplement, because if it's a very large one, then it might make sense to do an amended PIF and submit it. And it also just depends on the preference of the project manager too. So we kind of like work together and figure out which way is the best avenue to go. But you don't need to submit an amended PIF if that's not your preference.
Okay, great. Phew. So the other thing that I want to make sure when we talk about amendments and supplements is that, you know, since you're probably the person that's going to be working with the client on this, your team and your subs likely don't know that you got an approval for an amendment or supplement. So make sure to update and coordinate with those subs and those team members so that if there's change, I assume there's going to be a change in scope, hopefully fee and schedule too. So make sure that that message gets out to the team. So we could go on and on about contracts, but again, I would just, if I had to summarize, I would say, make sure to get a signed agreement, an executed agreement, save it in the project folder. If you have questions about any of the terms and conditions, Francine McAndrew is available. And then once we do that, Heather, we can start to develop our scope and staffing. So again, you may or may not have been involved in the proposal. Hopefully you were, but before you start actually getting people going, we encourage all project managers to make sure that the scope, staffing, schedule, and fee are developed to a point where then you can give to your team and they know how to proceed. You know, I've been around for a long time and I've seen a lot of different project managers, myself included. You know, you're under the gun. The client's expecting a deliverable, you know, in a very short amount of time. So you want to get everybody going as fast as possible. And then they come back and they say, well, what do you want us to do? And when do we need to do it by? Sometimes you've been so involved in the project setup that you forget nobody else has been involved. So just keep that in the back of your mind that, okay, now I need to convey everything I know to my team. So regarding the scope and staffing, so, you know, lots of questions that you'll want to answer when you're developing that. Maybe you already, you know, figured out who's going to work on the job. Hopefully you've confirmed that they're able to work on the job. I know we do that a lot too. We assume that people are available and when they're not. Especially with our outside consultants or sub-consultants, you know, they may not know that your agreement was actually executed and that you have approval to move forward. You know, sometimes they've been waiting 6 months for that contract to have gotten signed. I know with some municipalities, it takes a while, right? So we're not dictating, you know, exactly how you need to capture all of this. We're just encouraging you to do that in some manner. We do have some tools, and Catherine Katmanian will go over this next session to help you, but we're not going to say you must necessarily do your staff breakdown or your you know, kind of like what is shown here in a specific manner. I'm sure a lot of you already have templates and things that, you know, you like to use. So keep on using those. Just please make sure to use them. So we could go to the next one. Schedule and fee. So again, the project is all about scope, schedule, fee, right? After you get the contract. So schedule, you could go do a Gantt chart, you could do a Excel chart, you can just do a Word file. But we do, and sometimes that's dictated by the client. But if not, then we certainly encourage you to create both an internal schedule and an external schedule. So you may want to include, our this phase deliverable is due on October 31st, but we need to have at least 2 weeks for some QA/QC. So we need everybody to have it done, by October 15th. So that's what you'd want to let your team know. And, I'm sure a lot of you have figured out great ways to do that. I don't know if I could have a volunteer or two to share how you put your schedules together. Or should I call on people? No one? George, I see you in my camera. Can I call on you to give an example of how you put a schedule together usually? Oh,
Stu, I can mention something, for
Sure.
us, for a lot of our avant-grid projects, some of them are resource level to some degree, but, certainly by quality gate or milestone. And then, all the tasks in between, we use Microsoft Project almost exclusively. But for some one-off projects, we've used Excel just to make sure that we've mapped disciplines and deliverables and the work that's so that we can communicate internally, to your point. So I guess my point is that we have some pretty sophisticated schedules all the way down to some rudimentary, just to make sure that we have alignment.
great.
And we have done a couple one-off projects for avant-grid where we ran in an internal schedule that was in Microsoft Project. Again, all the way down from the milestone down through the tasks, and then we've created, a trimmed version of that so that we could present it to external stakeholders through progress updates. And the Gantt charts through Microsoft Project seems to be a great visual when you're trying to just have an open conversation about your status of your project with the client. It's just a good thing something to consider.
Mm-hmm. How about Sweater?
We've basically done the same thing. I find MS Project sometimes a lot of pain to work in. So that's why I sometimes avoid it. But when we start out a project, we have a process down in Charlotte where we do use the project to put all of our schedules in. It goes into our scheduling for our group. For the civil group, we meet once a week. We go through that with the workload list, the hours. So Excel, especially like the one you have on the left, works well for easy stuff and projects. Some clients want the Gantt chart. There's pros and cons to each, of course, but if it's something simple, the project I try to avoid and try and keep it as pared down as I possibly can to avoid it blowing up.
Have you found what works well, internally versus externally?
I think both work, just making sure you communicate often with your team, give them update on deadlines too, because even with the chart and schedules out there, most times they have a lot of other projects that they work on and they don't understand when things are due or if things change. So if you just leave that schedule out there, it doesn't do much. You have to make sure you keep going and trying to make sure that they're in the loop every step of the way.
And that's a great point. You know, you can't just say, well, I gave you the schedule. It's up to you to remember. As a project manager, like you say, you know, periodically need to be checking in. Do you remember this is the date? Or, hey, team, this is when we have to submit this. And, you know, this is the % complete, or et cetera, et cetera. Because as you say, most people are not just working on just one project and not just your project, right?
Yep.
Great. So after the schedule, well, not after, but necessarily with the schedule, we can go to the next slide. Working on fee. So again, Jackie's going to go into this in much more detail, but you know, maybe the method that you had to show the fee in the proposal was not well broken down. Maybe, you know, it just rolled it up to phases, but now you have to break it down by tasks. However, that fee needs to get transmitted or transferred to your team. This is the time that you need to make sure that you have some kind of breakdown or budget that the team understands. And I like to bring up here that, you know, we in some of the, I'll say, hopefully no architects get mad at me for this, but in some of the architectural led projects, it's, you know, this discipline has this amount of fee for this phase of work. But then it may be up to a discipline lead to say, okay, well, this is how that fee gets broken down by my senior mechanical engineer, my junior mechanical engineer, my technician, because people that are doing the work for you may only be thinking about like, well, how many hours do I have to work on this? Not necessarily knowing when you give them a, you know, you have $6,000 to do this phase of work. Well, what does that mean to me in man hours? So as a project manager, just be cognizant of, you may understand what that fee represents, but not everybody on your team may know what that means as far as, you know, their contribution to that deliverable. Also, sub-consultants. Again, you know, if your sub is doing just a particular piece of the work for a single discipline, it's easy. But if it's a sub-consultant that's going to be working throughout all the different phases of your project, making sure that they understand they can only spend, you're only going to bill for this amount in this phase, that amount in that phase, et cetera, et cetera. And then expenses and other costs. You know, we had to travel to the site. The site's 2 hours away, and you know, the client asked us to be there many more times than what was in the original proposal. I was watching those things, or letting people know, like, you know, in our proposal, we only had 5 trips to the site. So when you're going there, make sure you capture as much as you can, because you're going to be limited in the number of trips you can make. So, so after you've got that kind of figured out, hopefully you've engaged some of the leads on the team, maybe not the entire team, because, you know, it's very difficult for a team to just be told, hey, you need to do this for me at this fee, this schedule. And by the way, I never talked to you about it, but I'm expecting you to do it. That doesn't really ever go over well, right? So hopefully you've talked to the people that are going to be working with you to do this project along the way. But we can go to the next slide. We still want every project manager to have some kind of a kickoff. Kickoff meeting internally with the internal team. Maybe it includes the subs, maybe it doesn't. Then an external meeting with the client, the subs, the entire, just to make sure that we set the expectations and everybody is on the same page. They know what you know. They can share with you, I know I told you we could meet this schedule with this person, but maybe, it doesn't look like that's going to happen now. Just again, as Mike mentioned in the very beginning, just communication. We do have a template for kickoff that's in the location you see on the operations quality GPS, which is now quality and project management on our intranet. So feel free to use that. If you have another template that you've used or you've seen other people use, feel free to use that. But we do like to have in the kickoff, and Heather, you could go to the next slide. These agenda items included. So I'm sure there's many more that you all have included before, but if you can make sure to at least cover these topics, that'll set everybody off on a good starting point. I have to note that there are some projects that have very stringent safety hazard requirements, PPE requirements, sometimes where you need to do supply a health and safety plan, need to do a task hazard analysis before people actually go out in the field and do some work. I know, we haven't been great about that in the past, but I would encourage you to make sure that hopefully by the time that you've scheduled the kickoff meeting that you already have those things in place, or that you've talked to the team that maybe is going to go out and do the field work about what the requirements are. Maybe they're LaBella requirements, maybe they're the client requirements. There are a lot of clients that you need to go through their safety training before you can go on site. Hopefully we've taken those hours into account, et cetera, et cetera. And then any CAD coordination. Again, we have a lot of work sharing across offices. We're using more cloud-based tools, making sure everybody knows, this project's going to use BIM 360 or this project's using Civil 3D or, obviously ArcGIS. So encourage that kind of work plan digitally is thought about also. And we can go to the next slide. Please make sure when you're holding the internal and external, we want to make sure that we have some minutes so that we have that for the project record. Always need that to go back to, especially with the external, if the client is there, we said this at the beginning of the project, a few months into the project, a few weeks into the project, it's already possibly changed. You can go back to this and you have that record. Otherwise, it's, well, they said this, I said that, and who knows who said what. After a few weeks, it all gets fuzzy. And then, okay, now last but not least for my section here is your stakeholders. So Heather, we can go to the next slide. So, we talk a lot about the client, our team, our subconsultants, subcontractors, but with your client, you may only be working with a particular project manager that's been assigned on their side to the project, but there are all kinds of other groups that are going to participate in the project. So make sure that you as project manager understand from the client project manager who all those people are, because that project manager may or may not be the final decision maker. That person may have to go back to, you know, a committee or a board or a council, city council. And so you're going to need to know, you know, who's actually making, you know, what are their expectations going to be of the project. And then our favorite regulatory agencies, public safety agencies, funding agencies, and we can't forget, you know, since many of our projects are for the public. You may have public meetings built in to the project, you may not. But, you know, what I would say is, especially for municipalities, make sure that you're talking with your client about, are we engaging the public? Are they engaging the public? What are our responsibilities related to that? And we can go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, just identify with the client project manager what the level of involvement and how you're going to communicate with stakeholders. Like, we don't want people from our team reaching out to stakeholders directly. If the client says, we're going to do that, you know, we don't want you to be involved directly. You provide it to us, we'll talk to them, or maybe not. But definitely need to know that up front, because we've certainly gotten into, you know, cases where a client was not happy that some of our people, you know, reached out directly and they weren't included, and, you know, hopefully the project doesn't take a turn because of that. Know the agencies and code that are governed, that govern your client. You know, if you're working on a project in North Carolina, you're not going to use the New York State Building Code, et cetera, et cetera. And then, you know, the best way to build the trust and confidence is to engage early. I know, you know, like with New York State DEC or Pennsylvania DEP, excuse me, the earlier you reach out and just say, hey, or your client reaches out, these are the things we're looking to do with this project. Can you tell me if there's anything, you know, that is a red flag? Most times people will talk to you about that. You know, sometimes they'll be like, well, you have to follow the process and I can only talk to you after you've submitted the initial application. But in most cases that I've found, people are willing to talk, and that's very helpful, because these people will inform your design. I'm sure you've all had times where, you know, there's a group in the public that's very vocal and has a lot of power. And if they're not included and you're already, you know, halfway down the road with your project, you could be turning around and starting all over again. And obviously we don't want that to happen. So we have a few minutes. I was wondering if there's anyone that would like to share a story about a stakeholder story. I know you've got them. Victor, do you have a story?
Trying to associate with the real life type of thing. You know, it in my opinion, one of the most critical things in the external stakeholders meeting is to set the expectations and make sure it typically at Avangrid over here for the customer funded project, we used to do the internal external separate, but now we have them combined, and just, you know, make sure that they are aware of all the standards, for example, of documents, you know, how things are filed. And a lot of errors are made, for example, because with the customer funded project, because it's between three groups, let's say, NISAG developer and ISO, they use a contract called the pro forma, which is set in stone, right? That has the indemnity, all those types of things. And a lot of times in there, there's a clause that says, okay, response time in 2 weeks. So we've had issues in the past where the client or the developer said, well, you're not responding back in time. And so we learned early on to say, hey, look, for example, our response is going to vary between 2 to 4 weeks, depending on what's in the queue and depending on what department needs to, need to respond. In other meaning, if we are pursuing, let's say, on the Avenue side of it, protection and control. Like you said earlier, they may be available, they may have openings this month, but if engineering is delayed, for example, and next month we're number 13 in the queue, the response is not going to be 2 weeks. So that actually did happen, and that causes a lot of issues with customer-funded projects because they have liability clauses in there. If we don't perform, they could take Avangrid and sue them, and we have there's big time liability on these projects. So anyway, that would be my input on this.
Michael Imhoff. Oh, do you have a story you can share? No, can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Shareholders. Basically, you have to know who you're working for. I know doing a lot of phase ones and phase twos and things of that sort, you have to make sure you're doing what's in your client's best interest and not just going off the rails because of this or that. I'm not saying like going against any regulation, of course, but just always have that in mind.
Great.
And
How about
I'm sorry, I hardly heard what he said. I don't know if it's my microphone or.
No, it was my microphone. It was up and I didn't realize that. So I was talking to myself. My apologies. Yeah. So, key points that were touched on, I call it the project roster. Very, very critical that the project contact list is for the stakeholders, internally and externally, is regularly updated and maintained by the project manager. This causes a lot of issues because if we don't have the correct project roster or project team list corrected, then things could be sent out to individuals that are either no longer with the company or no longer are on the project. So that has been one experience. So from the get-go, what I said earlier, apologize, don't know who the gentleman was that you need to set expectations early on up front. On my end, working for the customer-funded projects, there are liability clauses, and they are steep if we do not perform. And it depends on the project and the level of complexity for each project. Each project is going to be different. For example, one thing that we went through, and this is, associating with experience, is we sign a contract with 3 parties: developer, NISO, and Avangrid. So NISO doesn't have any liability; they're in the clear. But Avangrid does if we do not respond back to the customer in a timely fashion. The contract has something called pro forma, which is set in stones that says, okay, the connecting transmission owner need to respond in 2 weeks. But early on, when we launch the meeting, the kickoff meeting, we instruct and we put it in writing, and it's documented on the a PowerPoint presentation that gets documented officially to indicate start of the project, but also in there is when you need to catch up to things that were missed in the contract, such as, hey, look, we'll respond back to you in 2 to 4 weeks time frame. And the reason for that is some of these departments are involved may have 2 or 3 projects in the queue right now, but few months from now they may have 14, 15 projects in the queue, and they're not going to respond in 2 weeks. And the last thing we need on these type of projects is for the developer to say, oh, Avangrid is holding my project back. As such, you need to pay for engineering, you need to pay for this. I was supposed to energize on such date this new substation, and now it's delayed 2 months because you did not respond in time. And now, Avangrid is in the hole millions of dollars, and it's a lot of grief to deal with. So setting the expectations up front and making sure you have that updated stakeholder list, like I said, the project team list is very, very critical in documenting everything that be sent out that is of value. And the people that work for Avangrid, they use ProjectWise, so that's where documents are stored for life, is very critical in case something does happen at the end. But that internal external kickoff is very, very critical. The internal is to make people aware of the project coming through. External one is where we, on my end, have to pay very close attention and make sure a lot of details are included that were missed in the contract or were incorrect or were somehow not caught up to.
Great. Well, everyone, in order to give Jackie time for all the good information she's going to share, I think we'll stop here and take a 10-minute break. So we'll return at 12:05.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. So most of you already know me, but I'm Jackie D'Agostino. I'm the billing manager in the Rochester headquarters office. So I do a lot of project manager billing, but then I also manage a lot of the billers up in the Rochester office as well. Today, we're going to go over different fee types and then what you guys have all been waiting for, the PIF. So we're going to go over that form as well. I have a lot of experience with it, but mostly from the accounting side. So if there's anything that you guys have found helpful, please feel free to interject at any point. Or if you have any questions, please feel free to stop me and just, let me know if you do have any questions. First thing I wanted to ask you, though, is what fee type that you're most familiar with? Okay. All right. So a lot of lump sum, hourlies, some unit. Woohoo! We got a unit billing for that's exciting. Not a lot of people are familiar with units, so that's exciting. All right, that's great. So you guys are at least familiar with a little bit of everything, or we have a good mix. So that's great. So for a lot of you, this will be review. So these are the different fee types that I will be going through: lump sum, phase fixed fee, unit billing, unit tables, the hourly with no max, the hourly with a max. Mixed fee is the only one I do not have an example of, because by nature, mixed fee very different. It's case by case basis. If you do use a mixed fee for a project with a client, I would say just have a discussion with your biller, just so that you guys are on the same page, and that when you send in the PIF, they're expecting a mixed fee, so that way they set up the project correctly for you from the get-go, and that way they know that they're going to expect mixed fee projects from you going forward as well. So it's just great to have that, like, hey, guess what? I'm gonna start sending out some mixed fees. And that way they know to expect that, and, you know, kind of just a conversation going with it. And then just know your billing cycle. LaBella is on like a 4-week, sometimes 5-week billing cycle. We do have a schedule available if you are interested in getting it. Hopefully you do have it, because I do usually send it out to project managers when they do become project managers. If you do not have it, please let me know. I would be more than happy to share it with you. But there are also different billing cycles depending on the clients that you work with. So depending on if they work on an accrual schedule. So Avangrid, one of our biggest clients, works with accruals. So that's an important thing to know. So they might be on a completely different schedule than LaBella is. So just keeping that in mind, and if they are on a different schedule, letting your biller know, having that conversation, say, hey, for this set of projects, these are on a different schedule. So, you know, let me know what you need from me, or, you know, are you okay? Are you familiar with this? So just having that conversation with your biller is just a great way to, you know, keep those lines of communication open, just so that you guys are both on the same page. So it's not a surprise when it's, you know, the day it's due, or the day before it's due, being like, hey, I need this. And, you know, when we have a whole slew of other project managers that also need things from us. So it's just good to give a heads up, like, hey, I'm starting to work with this client. I think they have different billing cycle than we would normally work with. So this is an example of a lump sum. It is a fixed price for the project. On the batch billing, you would need to indicate either the amount or the percent to be billed. You want to make sure that you're billing that covers the WIP. Hopefully everyone knows what WIP is, but I'm going to explain it anyways, so I'm super thorough. WIP stands for work in progress. So it's anything that's unbilled. It's unbilled labor, expenses. It can include consultants, or it's you know, covering to make sure that the project was pre-built. So in some cases you might bill ahead on a project, just depending on if the client requests the invoice ahead of time, maybe because they want to get the invoice in to meet their budgeting for the close of their fiscal year. So they want that money recorded in the prior year fiscal year and not the new fiscal year. So that happens a lot in some cases where they ask us to bill ahead. So keeping those things in mind, and making sure that the fee covers everything that you're spending on the project. And if it does, great. If it doesn't, then knowing whether you know, you went over because of maybe you did some additional work, and if you did additional work, maybe that's cause for, you know, putting together a supplemental, as Sue mentioned. So keeping track of those costs. This is an example of a phased fixed fee where the reimbursable expenses are included in the fee. So this is where there's a fixed price for each phase. So on the billing, you would indicate either the amount or the percentage that would be billed by each phase. You can have as many phases as you wanted in this, or as little. I've seen as little as 1 phase. I've seen as many as 20. It just all depends on how you set the project up. And then this would be when you have reimbursable expenses included. So this would be, you know, if you have mileage that you're charging to the project, that it's included in these phase budgets. This is a phased fixed fee where the reimbursable expenses are not included in the fee. So this is a case where there could be expenses that are billed in addition to the lump sum phase fees. So if you have mileage that we can oh my gosh, what was the word that I want to use here? That we can pass through to the client, pass through. So we can pass through to the client. So things that you charge for the project that we can then claim as reimbursement and have the client basically pay us back for what's spent on the project. Any questions so far on lump sum or phased fixed fee projects at all? Silence. Okay, I'm going to take that as no questions. Okay, unit billing, where we had one person that had some experience. So unit billing is a fixed price for a specific unit. In this example here, it is a number of an inspection. But I've seen a number of reports used. It could just be used as a fee for whatever, if you have a number of whatever. So it's just a price for a certain unit. This particular example also has a billing limit on it, but that's only to say that we used it so that way we had like a set price, so that way we could record that we weren't going over that set price for this particular contract. But on the batch billing, you would indicate the amount or the number of units that should be billed. In using unit billing, you would just want to make sure that your billing covers the WIP or the amount that was spent on the project for the time period that you're billing for. Units is a little bit different. If you use units, the table must be set up with your biller ahead of time. It's a fixed price for multiple different types of units. It's used with a couple of different departments currently, but in most cases, it's used to recoup costs for vehicles used or for our LaBella owned equipment. So a couple of things to note when using units in this case is when employees that use units need to submit weekly reports of the units to accounting or to their biller every week. So that way they promptly hit your billing reports. And that way, when you get your billing report, it has all those units on your report as costs. So that way, when you're looking at all the costs that have accumulated during the period, you can say, okay, here's all of my time, here's all my expenses, and here's my units as well. So that way you don't have to figure out your units after the fact. So it's important to get those units in, every week, so that way we can get them entered onto the projects in a timely manner for you. Before I move on, do you guys have any questions on the unit billing at all? More silence. Okay. Again, gonna take it as no questions. Okay, we're gonna move on to hourlies then. So this hourly invoice example is one that has no contract maximum. It's just billed based on the number of hours and expenses that accumulate during a billing period. So in this case, it would have a specific rate for the employee or employees that hit the project. The rates that are entered onto the project can be based on a labor multiplier that is applied when the project is set up, or it can be using very specific rates. One thing to note, if you are using specific rates, every employee needs to be assigned a specific rate. If an employee is not assigned a rate, Deltec will just default to a $0 rate. This is important because in accounting LaBella lands, WIP or unbilled time and expenses is considered revenue. So if you have labor that hits your project at $0, that equates to zero revenue in accounting lands. So Your biller will be your second set of eyes for this, making sure that everyone has a rate. But ultimately, these are your projects, so it's important for you to also keep in mind and double check, make sure everyone has a rate. It will also affect all of your reports and stuff like that. So it is very important to make sure everyone has a rate. It's more obvious for our hourly projects because it's on the first page of your billing reports. But lump sums, base fixed fees, units, on that second page of unbilled detail, like same thing, you should be making sure everybody has a billing rate too. Again, your biller will be double checking this because this is something that I'm like super OCD about. Again, something very important to keep an eye on, just to make sure everyone has a rate. Any questions about all that I just touched on? Crickets. Okay, I'm gonna assume that means full comprehension. So we're just gonna move on. All right, hourly not to exceed. Okay, so this is where you have a contract maximum. So this is billed based on the number of hours and expenses that accumulate during the billing period. The only difference here is that we have a limit on the project. Now, when you have limits, Deltec likes to do this fancy thing where once you get at the limit, where this one has about 13,107, it will try to write off any overage over that limit. This is considered a write-off on the project. It's very easy to miss because it doesn't actually come with this little red circle over it. It's just right here, this negative, just bolded. It's not big. It's not highlighted, so it's very easy to miss this negative write-off. So it's important to watch once you get close to your budgets. If you are going over, why are you going over? Is it because you did additional services? Can we get additional fee for those additional services? Did you go over due to extra requests from the client? Maybe it's a newer client. So it's good to have those conversations with your biller. Usually, if I'm your biller, if you're lucky enough to have me as your biller, I'm going to ask you those questions, or at least, take a snippet of this and say, hey, we went over, is there anything that we can do about this? Because I usually try to keep a really close eye on this and have all the other billers do the same thing as well, because it is very easy to miss when we go over it like this. And nobody likes a write-off. So, but again, something like this, same attention is needed to hourly projects with the rates and stuff, because we want everyone to have a rate. Any questions on the contract maximum, the rates, anything else? No. Okay. All right, so as I mentioned, rates can be based on a labor multiplier or specific rates. So when I say labor multiplier, I'm referring to a specific labor multiplier that is denoted in the PIF. And I'm going to, we'll jump into that in just a minute. But when we say labor multiplier, that is referring to a specific labor multiplier that is applied across the board to anyone who works on your project. It does make it easier as far as managing who's working on the project. So you don't have to really manage, instead of person A working on the project, maybe they're out sick, so person B has to step in. A labor multiplier will just automatically apply whatever the multiplier is across the board for somebody. So it's a lot less management on your part, making sure that everyone has a rate. So it is a little bit less administrative work. However, if you are using specific rates, maybe you have to use specific rates because you are working off of an MSA. Maybe you are working off of a contract that is making you use specific rates, then those rates. So labor multipliers are great, but you can't always use them. So it's important when we are required to use the specific rates, then we should be using them. So just keep that in mind too. If you aren't sure if you should be using, if you're working off a contract, if you should be using specific rates, you could always reach out to accounting and we can help you work through that. We have all of the MSAs and all of the rates available. So we can always give you, guidance as far as that. Okay, the project initiation form, also known as PIF. Okay, so a couple of things to know about the PIF form. So the project number, it is automated now. So you don't need to fill in anything under the project number. If you wanted to use a base number, because maybe you're working off of a project series and you wanted to pull the next available number from the project series, you can just put the base number and then just the XXX, and then your biller will just pull the next available number off of the base series. This happens a lot with Avangrid numbers. So we have a lot of base numbers with Avangrid. We have a couple with the National Grid now. But if you're not sure that you should be using a base number, again, always reach out to your biller and they can do the legwork to figure out if you should be using a base number. Usually it will determine if it's off of a contract or not. So we usually try to stick with a base number if it's off of an MSA. So they will let you know if it needs to be through a base number or not. Once a project number is assigned, you will get an automated email noting the project number, the client name, the project name, and what the project number is. There should be a 24-hour turnaround time. I want to stress that we do have 24 hours in accounting to give you that. We do try to do it within the same business day for you all, but 24 hours. So we do try to do it within the same business day. But if you need it quicker than that, maybe you're working under, a tight deadline, maybe you need to FedEx something out quicker, you can always message your biller and ask if they can expedite it for you. I guarantee you they will probably say yes. But 24 hours is usually our our standard. A contract number, if it's applicable. So again, this comes back to your MSA. So if you do have a contract number, you would just note that there. If it is off a contract number, just know if you have specific rates. Your billing client name and billing contact. So this might be different than your site contact. So just keep that in mind, making sure that you have that conversation with your client and asking who the invoices should be sent to, because it might be different than who your site contact is, because they might want it sent to their accounts payable department versus, them. So just having that conversation, knowing the phases and the fee breakdown, knowing whether you're going to use billing rates versus a multiplier, your schedule and your backlog. So every department does the backlog differently. So if you're not sure how your backlog's being handled, having that internal discussion with your departments. Accounting doesn't handle the backlog. So that's something that we would not be able to help you with. Knowing the staffing that's going to work on the project. So when you send in the PIF, knowing if you're going to have, John Smith and Jane Doe working on the project and what their specific rates are going to be if you're going to use the specific rates. Because we need all that information in accounting to be able to enter your project correctly. Knowing the project location, we now need the project state and county. We need this for tax purposes. So Rob Pepe has requested this information. So you can all blame him for that. So it's not us, your billers. So you can all blame Rob for that. Subconsultant and subcontractors. So having or setting the tone for their fees and for their payment terms. I know Sue mentioned this, like getting a signed contract, making sure that their signed contract has payment terms of paid when paid. If they're anything different, you need to get it approved by Stacy Fries or Rob Pepe. As Rob likes to say, we are not a bank. LaBella is not a bank. So anything different than paid when paid means that we are paying them before LaBella gets paid in most cases. Paid when paid means that we are not paying them until LaBella gets paid. So that means you're handing in that invoice to accounts payable, and then you are doing your billing, giving it to your biller. The biller is sending an invoice out to the client pays us. And then once LaBella gets paid, then we send the payment to the consultant. So in case you didn't know what those terms meant, now you do. If you have more questions about that, please feel free to contact me or accounts payable, and I can help walk you through that. If you have signed contracts with your consultants or subcontractors, feel free to send those to accounts payable. We do have the means to save those contracts in Deltek for you. And we would love to have those resources available for all project managers. So please, if you have those, please send those in. And then knowing whether your reimbursables are included in the fee or in addition to the fee, it makes a big difference for us in accounting, just how we set up your project. So just knowing that right off the bat is very helpful. Okay, so PIFs now. If you're unsure of where to get a PIF, this is where you can go. It's right on the LaBella intranet under the operations and forms. We usually update the PIF every quarter, it seems like, just with the new requirements from clients that have asked us on a regular basis, or things that we're like, hey, this is starting to come up, as things that have regularly starting to become required. So let's start including this as a new cell and stuff. So we regularly roll out new PIFs. It's helpful if you download the new PIF and use that one, because all the outdated ones do not have all the cells in there. So it's helpful if you do use the most recent PIF template. We won't send your PIF back to you if you don't have the most recent one, but if you don't have all the information for us, we will send you an email asking you for all the information that we do need from you. So we'll send you, or we'll save you some time if you use the new PIF. I don't know where I was going with that. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. We'll save you some time. And then also please include all these, if you have them, relevant documents. So the proposal, if you have a signed agreement, the purchase order is really big, especially for us in accounting, because usually there is important terms on the purchase order for us in accounting to read. Everything that you guys attach for us, we do open and review to make sure that, what's going into your project and the way we set it up is like correct for the client and is the way you ultimately would want it to be. So everything that you guys do attach for us in the PIF, we do review. So everything that you do attach is helpful for us. And if you're not sure if it's helpful, you can always reach out to your biller. and always ask. So if you're unsure, you know, if we need it, you can always ask. Okay, so I do have an example. I'm not going to go through these slides. I'm going to switch gears just because I feel like this is very small to see on the PowerPoint. So just bear with me, because sometimes switching from the PowerPoint to the Excel file is not so smooth on my end. So just bear with me. Okay, so let's see. All right. Can everybody see this? Yes, okay, I got thumbs up. Okay, all right, cool. All right, so I'm just gonna go through an example of a filled out PIF. I just find it most easier to have an example of a PIF in front of me when going through it. Again, if you have any questions of this when I'm going through it, please just stop me. Okay, so a couple of things. So the project number, again, you can just leave it blank if you're not going to use a base number or an extension number off of an existing number. This would be where you're putting your client's billing name and contact. If you have a phone number, please include it. An email address, same thing. If you have it, please include it. Even if it's if it's in Deltek, we will, as your biller, will double check to make sure that the contacts that's loaded into Deltek is updated with the correct phone number and email address, because it's helpful for us in accounting to have that updated information if the stuff needs to get emailed. If it's you who the project manager is, just list yourself. If it's someone else, then just list them. The division that the project is going to reside in. So this is important to note that the project is going to reside in wherever the project manager resides. And this is it doesn't matter whether the project that you're managing is an architecture project or a waste and recycling project. If you're in environmental, that's going to be an environmental project. So the project follows along wherever the project manager resides. So I know that there was like a little bit of confusion with that. So I just wanted to specifically, let you know that. The project name here. So there are two different names in Deltek. There is a short name and a long name in Deltek. The short name, there is a character limit. It's about 40 characters, and that's what you see in your timesheet screen. So just keep that in mind that like if you do have a really long name, it will print on the invoice to the client, but in the timesheet screen and like in the expense screen and stuff, like where you go to enter your time and expenses, it does cut it off a little bit. So just keep that in mind for you and your project staff. The market of the project type. If you have this stuff filled out, we will include this in Deltek for you. If you don't end up including it, we're not going to ask you for it, but marketing will later. So it's just helpful for you to fill it out now because it saves you work later on. And then the fee type. So again, all the fees that I just went over. So this would let us know how you want to bill the project. So this one is selected as a phased fixed fee, which means that we're going to bill each phase as a set price. So you would see each of these phases set up with the overall price listed here. But this is the breakdown that's listed here for the LaBella labor, the reimbursable expenses, and the sub-consultant. And what you list here, we will enter into Deltek, and you can pull out reports for all of this stuff. So it's important to break down all this information so that way you can have the tools available to you to be able to pull the reports and show, okay, I scheduled, $20,240 of labor for this APM services phase. Where am I at with this? If you only spent $10,000 and you're only 20% of the way through, and I'm just making up stuff, guys. Obviously, I don't know anything about APM services. Then you can, use that as a tool to figure out, where you are with those things. If people are supposed to be working on it and they're not, then you can follow up with them. Same thing with the geophysical survey phase. If they're at $2,000 and, their surveying is due, next week and they haven't even started it, then you say, hey guys, like, this is due next week. Like, it doesn't look like you've started working on this yet. Like, what's going on? And a lot of this is, again, flows right into these reports that I'm going to go over in session 5. So it's important to fill out all this information for us. The purchase order, if you have one available, and again, you can attach that to the PIF because that's very helpful for us. If you have a proposal for the project, you can link that here. And if you would like to move any of the proposal time, then you would just check this box here. If you only want to move a certain amount of the proposal time, I would definitely put that in the project notes here. So that way your biller doesn't move all of the proposal time over to your project. Especially if some of it does still belong on the proposal. Or if you're unsure if some of the proposal time needs to be moved and you want to review it, you can always send an email to your biller and say, hey, can I have a report for all of the time spent on the proposal? And they can run you a report and send it over to you. So you can always request that as well. This is the project location and county that I was referencing that Rob Puppy now wants to see. So please start to include this. If you do not include this, we will ask you for this because we do now need this information. The GPS coordinates, if you have this available, great. It does help us locating different type of projects in the area and stuff. But if you don't have it available, we're not going to hound you for it. But if you include it, we will enter it into Deltec for you.
Hey, Jackie.
Yes.
I had a quick question.
Yeah.
So I used to, long time ago, work for this other company, and we had this system that, like, if we had any project, we could go into the system and see where it was. So if we're starting to write a proposal for a new project, we can see if something's next door, et cetera. Is there some sort of database where it keeps all these GPS locations or whatever?
So I know that it's located in the project, in the project itself, but yeah, Sue, maybe you could answer this a little bit better than I can.
Sure. Michael, that's why we want to try to start adding that information here, because we do want to create that database. We don't have enough information yet on our projects to actually do that, but that is our intent with this.
Yeah, that would be great if we had a shape, just something near it, something like a shape file or some program everybody uses. Even, I don't know if you could do it in Google Earth, but anyway, I was just throwing that out there because it's really beneficial if we have a project and we don't know that we did something in the past there right next door.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yep.
Thanks. Carry on.
And then the question of if it's asked if this is a new client. So this is asking whether it's a new client or not. So that way the project folder team knows whether they need to create a new folder for the client. If you know who your biller is, just list it here. And then how we're invoicing the client. So if you know that they want the invoices emailed, then you would just check that box and include the email address. Or if they want them mailed or both, you would just, fill out that checkbox. And then if you know that it's a phase 1 environmental site assessment project, you would just check this box. We're trying to really keep track of those phase 1s. So that has a completely different checkbox for those ones. So this tab, I would definitely call like your bread and butter. It has everything. And then all the subsequent tabs kind of lead into the first tab. The second tab here is for the project staff, subs, and expenses. This is supplemental to the first tab. So if you are using specific rates, this is where you would fill this out. It's where you would list the employee names, the titles from the contract, and then the billing rates. So even if you aren't using specific or a contract per se, if you quoted specific rates based on your proposal, if you know that you wanted to use $110 for the project manager and $55 for the project monitor, then that's fine. Then you would just list them here. So we can use these rates instead of a labor multiplier. It's all however you want your project entered. If you didn't want to use billing rates though, and you wanted to use a labor multiplier, then you would just fill out that labor multiplier where it says target multiplier, and we would use whatever you list here. So if you wanted to use a labor multiplier, that's whatever you would put here. So if you wanted to use a 2.5, you would leave that there, and you could leave this whole entire section blank, and we would just use the labor multiplier instead of the specific rates. So it's however you want your project set up. Down below, you would list any sub-consultants that are anticipated to work on the project. So this should match whatever on the first tab. So if you have $1,000 listed here, it should match whatever listed in total here. So even if this is $1,000 sub-consultant is between 5 different sub-consultants, they should all be listed here. If you know that the diversity status, great, please give it to us. If you're not sure if they have a certain diversity status, then you can just leave it blank. But if you know that for sure, like this is a service disabled, veteran owned sub-consultant, then please list it, because we will double check that with Deltec to make sure that that sub-consultant is listed as that. It's important because all of our clients now are asking for this information. So I promise it's not us in accounting asking for it. I wouldn't want you to fill out any more information on this form than we need. But alas, all of our clients want this information. So more cells for you guys to complete. So I apologize ahead of time. But so if you know the information, great, please fill it out, please give it to us, and we'll make sure that it's in Deltec for you. And then down below would be all of the expenses that are anticipated to work on the project. So these are all given cells here, examples, and then we have a couple of empty cells if these aren't ones that you're going to be using. Again, this expense total should match whatever on this first tab here. So it should all be supplemental to this first tab. So you would fill out whatever the totals are for each category. The third tab is used for any unit billing. So this would be if you are using a certain number of units. So if you wanted to bill for to recoup costs for equipment or anything else like that, you would list it here. Again, this would be a conversation to have ahead of time with your biller, so that way they know that the units are coming ahead of time, so it's not a surprise. I had a project manager that did this to me the other day, and I was like, whoa, what's this? And I couldn't do anything with it because I had no idea that this was coming. So it's a really good idea to have the conversation ahead of time, so that way we know that it's coming, and we can create the tables for you correctly, and we're both on the same page.
Jackie,
Before-
sorry to
yes.
ask such a basic question, but so for example, equipment costs,
Yeah.
field personnel will fill that out. They submit that to whom? I think you said this already, but
So They would submit it to their biller, or they can submit it to me. I'm kind of the gatekeeper right now for all of the unit costs, because there's only 2 people in accounting that enter the units on the project. And they're Katie Foos and Katie O'Donnell. So 2 Katies in our group that enter them. So I'm kind of the gatekeeper that receive all of them and then send them over to them. So you can enter, but if you sent them to your biller, then it would funnel its way over to the Katies.
Okay, thank you.
The 4th tab is for project notes and files needed. So this tab would be for any project or billing notes for us in accounting. So this would be any information that you wanted to put here for us in accounting to know. So if you wanted to have, like, for example, this one is the PO number to be referenced on the invoice, or, you know, just to send the invoices to this John Smith and to CC and the PM. Or if you wanted to only move specific proposal time and you knew which proposal time to move, then you can notate it here. So that way your biller knows to only move, you know, time for you on 4/13 and 4/15, for example. So examples like that. And down below, when you keep scrolling, if you had specific notes for the expenses. So if you knew that there might be lab expenses, and lab expenses, we can mark up 10%, but only lab expenses can be marked up 10%, not all the other expenses. That would be a project note to put in here for accounting. So lab expenses are considered reimbursable expenses, but it's not, we wouldn't be able to apply a markup to all of the expenses. That would be something that would have to be a manual thing that accounting would have to do. So that's something that would be important to notate here. So anything that you think might be unusual or, you know, not standard, I would put here. Or if you know that there might be additional SWIP inspection phase that might be coming, you know, you can put that here or even up above. So examples like that, you know, you can put here. Then there's a checkbox for how the reimbursables are being billed. Are they included in the fee or are they in addition to the fee? So if they're included in your fixed fee in this example, you would just click the included in fee. And then down here, are there any percent markups for the consultants for the expenses? This is where you would denote if there's a markup at all. And then there's some questions about the electronic folder structure, if this is a waste and recycling project, if you want it on the Z drive, if you need it on SharePoint, file notes. The next
I'm Jackie. We have
tab
a
is for on-grid. Yes.
Jeff Sweater has a comment or a question in the chat. If you put the PO number on the PIF, do you still need to put it in the notes?
No, you don't need to. Some PMs or some project coordinators do put it in both places, but you do not need to put it in both places. Just some people do. So I was just being very thorough with this example.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. The next tab is for Avangrid projects in particular. So it's just how you want your Avangrid file folder structure to, and like where you want it on the Avangrid server specifically. So that's why it's in red, and just to make you, like, you know, only for Avangrid projects you need to fill this out for. Otherwise, you can just skip right over that one. So the spread of backlog. So this over here is for the spread of backlog. This is only for LaBella labor dollar amounts only. This only covers a 12-month period. So you would select the first month of your project, and you would distribute the effort for all of the groups that are working on your project over the next 12 months. It can be an estimate, so it doesn't need to be the end all be all of your project. And because it is an estimate after all, when you're first setting up your project, and your project changes, you know, as it evolves. So it is just an estimate. And then over here, this is just the fee distribution by division and discipline. So this is important for accounting to know the breakdown of each division for the overall project amount. Even if you're off by $1, it's going to yell at you that it doesn't equal the PIF amounts. So that's something to keep in mind, that even if you're off by like $1, it's going to yell at you that it doesn't match. So if you have that little red like amounts, so please check the amounts. Keep that in mind, because it's telling you that it doesn't equal with what you have on the very first tab. So if you have this error message, that's what it's coming from. This last tab is probably the most important tab for us in accounting for you to complete. This helps us fill out all of your reporting and budgeting, and flows into your Deltec reports that you all know and love, probably, hopefully. So this will come in from the first tab. So it fills out for your phase, and you will enter your breakdown of your labor on the top here, your sub-consultants over the phases, and then your expenses over the phases as well. Again, if you don't have it correct by the first tab, if it doesn't equal, it's going to yell at you and tell you that the distribution doesn't equal. So if you have something like this, then just double check that you know, something either on the first tab or on this tab, you know, isn't jiving. Especially for multidisciplinary projects, it is important for you to fill this tab out. If you do not fill this out, we are going to put it all under your budget where you reside. So if you are in environmental, we're going to put it all under environmental, whether that's correct or not. It is not our job to follow up with you. We probably will anyways, just because I tell my team to do that, especially if you have something like this filled out, but not this tab filled out. It is important for you guys to have this completed, so that way we can do your budgeting for you. So please fill this tab out. Okay, so let me go back to the PowerPoint here. All right, so here is just a PIF checklist of things that just to keep in mind when you do go through a PIF and important things just to keep in mind when you're going through it. I'm not going to read through this just because it's literally everything that I just went through, and I don't want to bore you guys. Okay, so invoices and batch billing, things to know. So I do have a poll question here. Let's see. So I want to know if you've had a meeting. Nope, not this one. Although I did forget about this poll question. This one, yes. I wanted to know about if you've had a meeting with your biller. Yeah, it's okay. A lot of people have not had a meeting, which is surprising. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. So a lot of you have not had a meeting yet. So if accounting does not reach out to you, please let me know. Or you can reach out to us in accounting as well. If you need that meeting as well. So not only do we go over your batch billing, but we also go over your your Deltek dashboard as well, which is very important. We help you set it up, and we go over tools that I will be going over in session 5, tools that help you manage your projects financially. So we as your biller are available here to help you with these things, but I want you to have the tools available at your fingertips to be able to go through these things as well. So batch billing, things to know. So it's important to review your batch billing for the staff that charge to your project, making sure that the staff that do charge to your project belong there, not only on the project itself, but on the phase level as well. Something to note that once you hand in your billing and an invoice goes out, there's no going back. We cannot move that time. So it's very important that you are thoroughly looking at your billing. Again, accounting is your second set of eyes, but that's not something that we can check for you. We don't know who's supposed to be working on your project. We don't know if John Smith, it belongs on, this project or that project. We can tell you if he's missing a rate, but we don't know if he's supposed to belong on your project. So that's something that you definitely have to check. Knowing if you need additional services, and if there's progress reports that need to go with your invoices and stuff. All of that should be like a nice package that goes with your invoice. So if there is like a progress report, or there's required backup that goes to your clients, it should be a nice like one package that goes to your clients. So sending all that stuff back to your biller at the time of billing is very helpful. So that way we can send one nice package to the client, and that way everything that gets sent to the client gets uploaded into Deltek. It's helpful for it to all be uploaded into Deltek for a variety of reasons, not only so that way it's there for historical purposes, but that way it's there for accounts receivable. So that way they can go, and pull it down if the client isn't paying, or for you to access it, at a different time. So it's helpful for everything to be there in one place. It's helpful for you to review against the contract. So seeing how much has been spent against the overall contract, and seeing the fee and the schedule and the staffing available and where you are with all of that. And then you should be clearly communicating to your biller what should be invoiced, if there's any changes needed, if there's documents that need to be sent with the final invoice. So if you're holding time month after month after month, telling us why you're holding the time, maybe you're working on an amendment. We won't know that, but we will ask you after, 3 or 4 months, the time's getting really old, saying, hey, why are you keep holding this? So it's good to clearly communicate working on an amendment. So just being, or clearly communicating that kind of just breaks down the need for like additional questions overall as well. And then if you do have any questions, just contacting your biller, or if you're unsure what to do with something, or if you get a question from a client on invoicing, you can always contact your biller and say, hey, what should I do with this? So you can always use us as a resource as well. And then in session 5, as I mentioned, we're going to review Deltek reporting and invoicing. Was there a question in the chat? Yeah, okay, hold on, let's see.
It says, from Michael Imhoff, my biller just changed, but I've met with you, Jackie.
Oh, okay. Okay. So then I think we're okay then.
Yeah.
Not a question. I just wanted to clarify. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know you just changed. Okay, and then, so this is something where there's an example of an unbilled detail and just asking what's missing. So if you're looking at something like this, in blue will always be the project number and name, in green will always be the phase number and name. And then looking at all the billing rates, and then, you know, it's very easy to miss here right in the middle, these billing rates. So not only is LaBella missing a rate, but down below, so is Brittany McPhee. So it's very easy to miss these billing rates, especially when they're like kind of stuck in the middle here of these specific rates, you know, and they're just one small little line and you have all this detail. So it's very easy to miss rates like this. So just as an example, I think that's, is that the end here? Yes, any questions? Silence again.
Well,
I just
thank you
blew you
all.
all away
Excellent job, Jackie. Lots of information.
so much.
So obviously Jackie's available if you think of something after this session, but otherwise we will see you next week for session 4. So have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.